Well, hello everybody and welcome to Chef's Baking Blog. Today I'm going to make some cherry and fennel focaccia. In fact, I'm going to make focaccia for my next two videos, I think. This large one and then some mini ones for another video. But this cherry and fennel focaccia comes from an idea that I saw in The Guardian, but I didn't particularly like that recipe for the focaccia, so I'm using my own recipe for the focaccia and just putting the cherries and the fennel seeds over the top. It does take a little bit of time because you have to make the dough, then you have to proof it for quite a while, then you have to press it into a pan, or you can do it free form, but press it into a pan, and then you leave it again to rise for another hour or so before you add the cherries and the fennel seeds and you bake it. But it should be very, very tasty. So I'm going to use a rather large pan, which is 42 centimeters by 30 centimeters, which is 16.5 inches by 12 inches. But you could use two smaller pans if you wanted to, or you could actually cut the recipe in half and just use one small pan. So I'll go on to the ingredients. And for this, I have 600 grams, which is 4 cups based on scooping packed flour into a 250 milliliter cup of 00 flour, which is an Italian flour. That has a protein level of 13%, but you could use strong white bread flour or very strong bread flour if you wanted to. That will work just as well. Then I have 20 grams, 1.5 tablespoons of caster sugar, 150 milliliters, half a cup plus 2 tablespoons of milk, which I've left it to come to room temperature, 290 milliliters, 1.25 cups minus 2 teaspoons of water, again at room temperature. I have 65 milliliters, 1/4 cup plus 1 teaspoon of olive oil, 15 grams, 2.5 teaspoons of salt, 7 grams, 2.25 teaspoons or 1 packet of instant yeast, and here I have 6 grams, 1.25 teaspoons of fennel seeds, which I have put into a bag and used a rolling pin to crush them so that they're much smaller pieces, basically. A few larger pieces, but mainly much smaller pieces. I also have 300 grams, 10.5 ounces of cherries, which I have taken the pits out of. So the 300 grams was before I removed the pits from the cherries. And then I have some more olive oil, which is going to grease my pan and then be drizzled over the top of the focaccia before it goes into the oven. So that's all the ingredients, and the first thing we need to do is to make our dough. And to make the dough, I'm going to put my water into the bowl of a stand mixer and the milk, and my olive oil can go in as well. Along with the yeast and the sugar. And I'm just going to give those a mix around to get those combined. And that's good enough like that. So then I'm going to add in my flour, and I'll do that a bit at a time, I think, with the mixer running. And I'll, as I add the flour, I'll put the salt in as well, halfway through, and then I'm going to mix everything until it's a shaggy dough. So that's half the dough in. So I'm going to sprinkle my salt in as well, and then I'm just going to tip the remaining half of the flour. Sorry, that's half the flour in. I'll put the salt in and the remaining flour, and I'm going to mix that now until it's come together into a shaggy dough. And I should say you can use any stand mixer you want. I'm using the one that I've got. Now that's quickly become a shaggy dough. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to knead that for between 15 and 20 minutes. It will still be a very tacky dough, but it will be nice and stretchy. So I've kneaded that now for about 20 minutes. And this roller has the effect of hand kneading, basically. So that's about 20 minutes of hand kneading. In another type of stand mixer, you may need slightly less time, but it's a tacky dough, and I'm going to tip that out onto a floured work surface so that I can form it into a ball before I proof it. Now I could actually just leave it in this bowl as it is to proof, but I'll show you how I'm actually going to do it. So with my dough tipped out onto a floured surface, I'm going to turn it over on itself like that. And then I'm going to form it into a ball, and I'll knock off excess flour. Just like that. And I'm going to put that into a bowl which I have greased. Like that. And I'm going to cover it and leave it to rise for about 2 hours. So I'll put my lid on like that. And I'm going to leave it to rise until it has doubled in size. And once it's completely doubled in size, I will come back and we'll go on to the next step, which is to spread that dough into our oiled pan ready for baking eventually. So it's been about 2 hours since I've left my dough to rise. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to drizzle some oil into my pan. Like that. And I'm going to brush it over the base and just around the edge. Just like that. And then I'm going to put my dough into it. Now that has risen nicely, and it should tip out fairly easily. It does. So I'm going to press that down and spread it over the pan. And I want to cover the pan completely, but if it seems to shrink back, then I will just leave it for a minute or two or 5 minutes and continue. And as you can see, that is shrinking back. And if there's any big air bubbles, I'm going to burst those at this stage. And that's shrinking back, so I'm going to leave that, and then in 5 minutes I will return to it and spread it out more. But I should say, if it doesn't completely cover the bottom of the pan, that's perfectly fine. So I've spread that out now, and it's almost reaching the edges, and I could do it a little bit more, but I'm going to leave it like that because it's going to rise. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to cover that with a clean towel, and I'm going to leave it for another hour basically. And as the hour comes to an end, I'm going to preheat my oven to 180 degrees Celsius, 160 Celsius with a fan, 350 Fahrenheit, and that will then be ready to take this focaccia. So I'll come back in an hour and we'll drizzle some oil over the top, put the cherries and the fennel seeds on the top, leave it for a further 5 minutes, and then we'll bake it. So my oven is preheating now, and my dough has risen for about an hour. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to drizzle some more oil over the top, just like that. And then I'm going to take my cherries and I'm going to press those into the dough. And you can do this randomly, or you can try to make it equal, it's up to you. And you can use more or fewer. I'm not pressing all the way down into the dough. I'm resting it so there's still some dough underneath the cherries, and I think that's probably enough. I've got one left, so I'll eat that. And then I'm going to take my crushed fennel and sprinkle that over as well. And that's good enough. So the final thing I'm going to do is take a finger and I'm just going to make some additional dents in the dough. Like that. And I'm going to put that into the oven and I'm going to bake it for 35 to 40 minutes until it rises up and it browns quite nicely. Now, because there's going to be some juice being released from these cherries, if I think the dough needs cooking a little bit longer, I will leave it in for a little bit longer. But if it's browned on top, I will cover the top with foil so that it doesn't brown anymore, but just leave it for the juices to cook through into the dough. So at that stage, once I think it's cooked through, I take it out of the oven and immediately transfer it to a wire rack and leave it to cool. And once it's cooled down, I'll come back and show you the results. I baked the cherry and fennel seed focaccia for 40 minutes and it rose up quite nicely, and it looked quite well baked, so I took it out of the oven and I put it onto a wire rack to cool down. So it's now cooled down and I've cut a piece of it off, so I'll show you what it looks like. So as you can see, it's baked up very nicely. This is the piece which I've cut and it's lovely and soft, as focaccia should be. So I'll have a taste of this piece. And the first bite is just the focaccia by itself with a bit of the fennel seed on the top. and that tastes very good. So now I'll bite into the cherry piece as well. That is lovely, I have to say. Cherries are lovely and juicy and fruity, and it seems to bring out the flavour of the fennel seed, unless there was just a little bit more fennel seed in that bite. So that is an excellent bake, I have to say. So that's going to be it for this recipe. I hope you've enjoyed it, and if you have, please give me the thumbs up below and click to subscribe to my YouTube channel. In the top right hand corner of the screen there'll be an eye that you can click on, and that will take you to a link for the recipe, and I'll put a link below the video as well. And I'll be back with another recipe in the very near future. So until then, happy baking.